Now I'm late. There was problems with the program today, starting program. So again, just came up right about the time I posted the video. So I had to video, but I'm late. So I do apologize for that, but got some great charts for you. The S&P tried to get a reversal of conditions today with momentum. Nasdaq's already got it. Got another red bar reflecting the momentum here, but couldn't flip the cloud. Again, we'll be watching to see if we fill the gap or go back and test the trend line. I'll talk about that. Got to be looking, do we start getting green bars here, or do we start going negative with the awesome oscillator? So again, I'm going to be watching that. Momentum indicators have flipped. Be watching the gap fill. I still think S&P will reach my target level and go up and hit the trend line in the monthly time frame. And again, we'll see what happens, but it's really going to depend on Nvidia if we start selling off sharply or attempt to rebound. Here, Nasdaq being helped by Nvidia today. Nvidia big time, and again, Nasdaq 0.71%. Again, we'll be looking to see if we get green bars or do we go negative with the awesome oscillator. Momentum is bearish here. It's been bearish before, but again, still moved higher. So we're watching, do we get a gap fill here? And if we do we move to new highs with Nasdaq, or does it diverge with S&P? My guess is S&P is going to make a new high. I believe we're in a topping process, as I keep saying. We're going to reach my objective target in that mid 6,000 area, maybe as high as 6,100 on the S&P. Nvidia up big time today. Earnings up 4.89%. Nvidia coming back to fill the gap today. Nasdaq not there yet. So again, do we get a bigger move? I talked about a possible double top, or do we just blow past this area and move to the upper end of the rising wedge? Let me show you that. And here it is. Again, we have the divergences that gave us the sell-off. We got the candle of indecision there just to underneath the pink trend line, and this support level we closed right at it, the horizontal support level from the June high. Again, back above the pink trend line. So again, this trend line now comes into play. Could form a triple divergence if we overthrow it. Again, a big move on that channel yesterday, and I don't have time to show it to you today. Go look at the video. I spent a lot of time showing you the charts on Nvidia yesterday. Channel blow past this level. Big rally on Nvidia, but again, near a major trend line of resistance here at this peak right here and this trend line. Go past that. Again, you have another channel line, which I showed you in blue yesterday. Go watch the video. And late today, I don't have time to show it. You're watching Nvidia as we go into tomorrow's trading ahead of earnings after the close on Wednesday. The same pattern going on here, a rising wedge like the S&P 500, like NASDAQ 100. The S&P is doing something very similar to what it did in 2022. Now, in order for the S&P to top out and be confirmed, we got to get back above the signal line here with the volatility oscillator and remain above it and break this downward trend line. It's doing something very simple. This is the S&P up here. This is the volatility oscillator for the S&P right here. Again, it turned up, turned back down, turned up, and turned back down. As it was turning back down, again, it looks very similar to what we have right now. It turned up, turned back down, turned up, and now it's turning back down. And again, that was right before it peaked, and it went up another 2 weeks. Above the previous peak, completed the divergence, and that was it. It started a sharp reversal. We could see the same thing, something very similar happen here. Again, we're kind of going sideways here, doing this, kind of going sideways here, doing this. But forming a very similar pattern that we had back in 2022 with volatility. Again, when we get above the signal line, volatility rises, the S&P declines. We're able to get back above the signal line and remain above it. This is telling me we have not confirmed a top. This will usually validate it within a couple of weeks, 1 or 2 weeks or so. Very similar pattern right here. We had this move up, this move down, and then this lower high, and then this turn down gave us the final push higher. And again, that's exactly what's happening right here. So wouldn't be surprised to see this push down, and then again for the market to reach my objective target in the monthly time frame. Push the S&P trend direction back up here, and again, and then get the final push down. And once we see the push into the negative region, it will confirm a change in direction, the trend changing. And again, very similar over here. Again, a push up, a pull back. Here we went lower. Here we got a higher low, and then a final push higher for that final 2 weeks. Complete the divergence there in January of 2022, and then it went negative and we started to sell off, and it too validated the change in direction of trend, and we stayed in negative territory throughout the decline. So just something worth paying attention to. My objective target level in that monthly time frame goes as high as 6,100, into the 6,100 area, the low to mid to high 6,100 range. I think a good target level is that mid 6,000 area, 6,040 to 6,199. That range in there is likely where we're going to see the S&P peak. Okay, when I first made this video, I was having problems with this charting program. Finally got it to work. Their site was down or something for a little while. Looking at this bottoming tail, this doji on the Dow at the 200 period moving average, and I think we'll fill these gaps back up here that we had gapped lower last Friday. Again, this is the S&P will push to new high. Maybe the NASDAQ does. We'll watch. Sometimes they diverge at topping points. To show you that doji on the Dow. MACD is about to cross over. We'll see if it's prevented, if we can get a big rally back up. And it really is going to depend on Nvidia earnings real fast. Sorry I'm posting late, but again, my program was down for quite a while. I think that they were going to get the site back up. They got it back up. That's why I'm posting a little bit late. Sorry about that. And the NASDAQ is going to move up or down based on Nvidia earnings in all likelihood. Nvidia is coming back up towards the gap fill there to fill the gap. NASDAQ is just at gap resistance right here. Again, looking at these two trend lines right here, one excluding the shadow, we're bouncing off of it, got back up above that 20 period, bouncing off of it. The VIX predicted last Friday we'd either get a bounce or a bottom. Again, is this a gap and trap and we go higher and back up to the upper boundary here? Or is it a gap and fill? Or do we go a little bit lower and then come back up and try to fill this gap? We'll be watching. But again, we'll be looking at the Nvidia earnings after the bell on Wednesday. We'll get confirmation of a lower high or divergence on the RSI and the MACD. We've got this new rising wedge. The rising wedge has expanded in a topping process. Again, I believe we're in a blow-off top. We'll be watching. I think the S&P is going to go move to a new all-time high. I keep saying what I think. I think we're going to hit my target level on that monthly chart. Then we'll be watching. Do we diverge with NASDAQ? NASDAQ's just below the monthly trend line. S&P sometimes diverges with NASDAQ at turning points. They did over here at the July peak. On this chart right here, I've marked a gap fill at 20,897. Okay, and again, this trend line right here moves slightly on me. Let me change that. Again, we're trying to bounce off that area. So again, we'll be watching the gap fill, and if we get above that area, if we don't just fill the gap and then break the trend line, we'll be looking at this trend line up here, and then we'll be looking at a potential divergence on the RSI and the MACD. So we'll be watching to see how it unfolds. I do believe we're going to go up and fill this gap at 20,897, that 20,900 area, and then we'll be watching. Do we go make a new high, or do we get a lower high and start diverging with the S&P? S&P is likely going to reach my objective target level, 6,040 area or mid 6,000 area. Again, just eyeballing it. Overthrow the trend line on the monthly chart, we could still reach 6,100. Again, S&P could be expanding, rising wedge pattern. Again, we broke this trend line. We only got confirmation. We never got a follow through to the break of this trend line. We broke it. We confirmed it. Right there. And never got the follow through. Never took out key support. So again, drawn another trend line from right there and bounce off of our 50 period. We talked about the presidential election rally and the rally with the Fed ahead of this rally. That was very likely, and that we would go back and back test the trend lines. And I told you again, if we back test this trend line, here again, we can move to a new high. Well, we overthrew it. So again, this pattern looks to be expanding. To me, I think we will get a divergence here in the more recent price action on the RSI, and I think we'll go up and we'll reach my objective target. The high has been 6,017, I believe. The trend line is just directly above that in that mid 6,000 area or so. 6,040, maybe 50, just eyeballing it. We go as high as the 6,100 range. Between 6,040 to 6,199 into that 6,100 mid to, to low to mid to high area. Overthrow the trend line in the monthly time frame. But again, You got a divergence here on the MACD that's given us a sell-off, but we're finding support at gap support and our 20-period moving average. We're trying to bounce. I'll be watching the gap fill here at this 59.50 area. And again, my guess is we're going to fill that gap or push down a little bit more and then come back up and fill the gap, one or the other. And I think you're probably going to head up to this level to reach my objective target levels on the weekly and the monthly time frame that I've been talking about. Again, the S&P could still try to form a divergence. We're bouncing off the 200 period moving average. It still may be we try to come back below gap support and again try to form a divergence down here or even fill that gap. That is certainly possible. We'll be watching to see if that plays out, or if we just get a higher low and we're bouncing off gap support, we're bouncing off the 200 and we start moving our way higher to fill that gap. So again, still room to move lower if we not done with the sell-off. Again, we'll be watching to see how it unfolds. As on a positive note, NASDAQ got the 50, got back above the 50 today. We had a gap and trap at the open. 50 got back above the 200. Price closed back above the 200. So again, if that momentum could continue, we could continue to hold above these 200 periods. Then we may bounce off the 20 periods in this in the daily time frame. NASDAQ 5-minute chart here for the S&P 500. We got that 50 back above the 200 today. We gapped lower. We went back and we tested this low and we rebounded back up above the 200 period moving average, and then the 50 followed. So if that momentum could continue, we could be on our way back up to fill this gap up here. We had stalled previously at gap resistance here. Now we're trying to clear that area, and we pretty much closed right there at gap resistance, just slightly above gap resistance or so, or right at it. I guess if I include the shadow, it would be right there at it. But again, we'll be looking at this gap at the 59.50 area, and if we can get a gap and trap with this move over here on the larger daily time frame, then you can try to go back and move above that gap fill, challenge the highs, reach the objective targets. To these, just going back to these 60-minute charts, the S&P 500. Whoops, sorry about that. I just knocked into the mic there. The P had this downward channel. It broke through that level. Again, we'll be watching to see do the lows here at gap support and the 200 period hold or not. And if not, even if we go a little bit lower, we're still likely going to fill the gap here at the 29.50 area. So again, it might be that we just got a slightly higher low right here on the RSI, and again going to go back up. And again, we could eventually form a larger divergence with this peak or a brand new divergence again in the 2-minute time frame if we reach our target level there in the monthly time frame. Watching, does the RSI and MACD roll back over? The MACD go positive and we start moving, fill the gap ahead of Nvidia earnings or with it. Now we're rallying on Monday and Tuesday. Thing here with the MACD and RSI on the NASDAQ 60-minute chart. Again, we moved just beyond gap support. We did not fill that gap, 20,277. The gap up here is 20,000, just under 20,900. And I'll be watching, does the S&P diverge with the NASDAQ, or does the NASDAQ make new highs? If we turn back down, then we'll be looking for divergences to develop, and then you've got a shot at filling the gap right here, so we'll be watching that. Possibility of a head and shoulders under construction if we stop making new highs, so we'll be watching that. We're looking for clues, looking for a top. May not be done. Looking for evidence. 60-minute chart here. If the S&P rallies right now or goes a little bit lower and rallies, again, this trend line is going to be really important to be watching here. Again, this rising wedge over here has likely expanded into a larger rising wedge pattern. We go towards that upper boundary of the rising wedge in the daily time frame. Again, we can move closer to this trend line, or we have this trend line also in the weekly time frame that we're watching from the peaks earlier in the year, there in March and July, that are pointing up towards that trend line. So we can move, and again, the rising wedge in the daily time frame, we might overthrow it, moving towards this area. And that's why I keep saying we can move towards the 6100 area and overthrow the trend line in the monthly time frame if we try to hit this blue channel, which is parallel to the lower boundary here, including the shadow, these peaks over here. So just some levels I'm watching. Again, this divergence is to form. May not be done yet. We still may go up here. I told you to be watching the black trend line right here, that we'd be moving towards it or overthrow it. We overthrew it. Now that we overthrew it, we closed above it. Now you have the trend line, including the shadow over here that comes now into play.